Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Chaiva Tato Jayamudiraye. Good. Welcome back. Today we start the next section of the Aranyaka Parva, and it's a continuation of what we've seen over the last several weeks, what we call the Vyadha Gita. Why do we call it Vyadha Gita? Gita is in this context used to refer to an excerpt of a larger scripture. There are many Gitas, Bhagavad Gita, of course, the most widely known Gita, but generally a section extracted from a larger scripture can also often be called Gita. Bhagavad Gita is 700 verses extracted from the 12th book of the Mahabharata. This is a shorter section excerpted from the third book, Aranyaka Parva. We call it Vyadha Gita. The next section of the Vyadha Gita is what we're starting today, 2 chapters, 201 and 202. And the subject matter is self-control. And you're going to notice a striking similarity between some of these verses and some of the verses in the Bhagavad Gita. Should we be surprised by that? Who is the author of the entire Mahabharata? We attribute it to Vyasa. Probably not the Vyasa who compiled the Vedas, one of his successors in his family. And that Vyasa who wrote the entire Mahabharata, he wrote the Bhagavad Gita section and he wrote the Vyadha Gita section, so we would expect to find similarities. In fact, if there were no similarities, that would lead us to suspect there are many authors. The fact that there are similarities supports the theory that there is one author. So that's what we're going to see as we look at this next section. Just the context, which... Actually, let's see the first verse. And then I'll describe the context. Remember, the Vyadha was what an unlikely character to have the role of guru. In this case, the guru who's giving all of his spiritual instruction is a Vyadha. Vyadha, as we mentioned before, usually means hunter. But in this case, it means butcher. So, Vyadha vacha, Vijnanartam manushyanam, Vijnanartam manah purvam pravartate, manah purvam pravartate, tat prapya kamam bhajate, tat prapya kamam Krodham cha dvija sattama, Krodham cha dvija sattama, O pious twice born. The Vyadha addresses the Brahmana who has come to his butcher shop in Mithila to receive this spiritual instruction. So what is he telling this Brahmana? He's giving him an instruction, and here's the introduction part. Instruction about how a person with good values gets corrupted. And that's a very timely topic because we see so many examples. Unfortunately, we're seeing too many examples of young Muslims who are being radicalized. Let's look at that for a moment. This is happening quite a bit in Europe just now. Not that it happens only in Europe, it happens in Palestine, it happens throughout the Middle East, but we're seeing lots of evidence of it happening in Europe. What is that? An immigrant family from the Middle East. They raised their children someplace in Europe, And these are normal kids. In fact, the kids are probably not unlike your kids. Do your kids spend a lot of time on their phones? Do your kids spend a lot of time listening to music? And chances are, these kids in Muslim families being raised in various parts of Europe, chances are they're very similar to your kids with the phones and the music and all of that. But then something happens. They become disaffected somehow with the culture and things. And the term that's been used quite widely is they become radicalized. You know what that term means? It means they fall under the spell of this propaganda issued by ISIS and Al-Qaeda and these other radical groups. And they become kind of brainwashed or programmed by this propaganda, and that's called being radicalized. Well, the fact that they're subject to being radicalized means what? Their value structure is being shifted. What does it mean to be radicalized? Previously, they had a value for education and job and family and coming up in the local culture. And now their value is for what? Their value is for killing non-Muslims. That's a pretty radical shift of values. How does that radical shift of values that shift? Do you think that takes place overnight? Yesterday they're listening to music and going to school, and then the following day they grab a gun and go out and start shooting kafirs, infidels. You know very well it doesn't take place overnight. There is a process through which their value structure is degraded. Now, what Vyadha is going to teach us in this section is not only these young kids are subject to their value system being corrupted, everyone is subject to the same kind of pressure. Not radicalization, which is to say that your value structure is not likely to undergo the same change as these young people, but here's a warning. Your value structure is subject to corruption. Anyone's value structure is subject to corruption. That's our introduction, and he explains how that corruption takes place. And he starts in this first verse. He says, what is the first step? Vijnanartam manushyanam manah purvam pravartate. He says, purvam, first of all. Manaha pravartate, the mind gets engaged. Whose mind? Manushyanam, for any person. So someone's mind gets engaged in what? Vijnanartam, in some object of knowledge. The mind gets engaged in something. In the case of these young Europeans, the mind gets engaged in the propaganda videos that are available on the internet. That would be the example. But shall we set those young terrorists aside and use an example that you can relate to, because you're not likely to watch those videos. But you are more likely, and we're just going to use an example. Suppose you see in a newspaper an advertisement for a really, really nice home. You've been looking for a new home, you're living in kind of an old, cramped home, and you see this advertisement for a really spectacular house. Really two-story, anyway, $1-2 million, you can spend $1 million or $2 million easily on a really nice house. So you see an advertisement for this really nice house. This is the first step. Manaha purvam pravartate. First of all, the mind gets engaged, vijnanartam, in some object, in something. In this example, your mind gets engaged in this house, this very beautiful, desirable house. Then what happens? Tatprapya, having learned about that, having gained that knowledge, which means having found out about that house, what happens next? Kamam bhajate. The root bhaj here means to enjoy, to experience. You feel kama, you feel desire. First, you see the advertisement, step 1. Step 2, you feel desire. I want that house. It's a beautiful house. I want that house. Then what happens next? Step 3, krodham cha. Not only does kama arise, but also krodha, anger. Why would anger arise? It's a $2 million house. What will be the mortgage? Can you afford that? Maybe you can, but many, suppose you can't afford that. $2 million house, you can't afford that mortgage. Well, how do you feel? You really want it. Suppose you phone up the realtor, you go and see that house. Now you're really hooked. You see that, they take you through, and you see anyway, you know what these houses are like, and a big swimming pool in back, and the sauna, and all of this high-end stuff. So you see that, so step 1, you see it. Step 2, kama, you want it. Step 3, you can't afford it. Krodha. Then what happens? Tatas tadartam yatate, tatas tadartam karmacharabhate mahata karmacharabhate ishtanam rupa gandha abhyasam cha nishe. So then, what happens after the anger? Tataha, thereafter, tadartam, for the sake of getting that house, what do? Yatate, you strive. Karma prarabhate, and you engage, karma cha arabhate, and you engage in hard work. How much hard work? Mahat. Mahat karma arabhate. What do? You start working 12-hour days. You start climbing your way up in your department or your organization so you can get a raise, so you can get enough money to afford that. Of course, even with all this effort, you're working 12-hour days, and maybe you've taken a second job or whatever you're doing something extraordinary for the sake of getting this beautiful house, but still the mortgage is out of reach. Even with your added income, the mortgage is still out of reach. So what do? When you go and see the banker to apply for a mortgage, do people ever fudge the numbers a little bit on these mortgage applications? You remember in 2007, 2008, it was the mortgage companies who were fudging the numbers, leading to this whole mortgage meltdown. But anyway, set that aside. Suppose you really want the house, you really work hard to get some extra money, you still don't have enough money to afford the mortgage, and you're so driven that you fudge the numbers so you can get the mortgage. So now guess what? You get to move into that beautiful house. Wow! Ishtanam abhyasam cha nishevate. You get to nishevate, you get to enjoy. You get to enjoy what? Ishtanam. You engage in the enjoyment of ishta, what you desired. Your desired home, you enjoy. Rupa gandhanam, along with its rupa, its beauty, its gandha, its fragrance, whatever you want to think of that as representing. So you enjoy all the glory and wonderful of your beautiful new home. Nishevate, you enjoy all of that. The key word here is abhyasam. Repeatedly. Every day, you enjoy that beauty of your new home. It's very interesting. Before you moved into that house, that beautiful new home was a luxury you really longed for. Once you've lived in that beautiful home for a month, is it a luxury anymore? It has become your norm. It has become your standard. Previously, it was a luxury. Now, it's your normal life. You can see the process through which values start to slip. Already values have slipped if you had to fudge the numbers to get the mortgage. And now, because the house no longer seems like a luxury, now the house seems normal, and now you're thinking, what next? Now I have this beautiful house. Now what? What next? Puja Swami Dayananda used to use this. He picked up one English expression. He really liked it. He said, you get a kick out of something. He liked that expression. You get a kick out of it. He said that if you move in, he would say, if you moved into this new house, you get a real kick. You know, the enjoying all that luxury of that house, you get a kick. You get a kick out of it. But he used to observe that kick means some emotional exhilaration. That's a good way of putting it. That emotional exhilaration, is it sustained or does it wear off over a period of time? You know, it wears off. So that kick wears away. And as that kick wears away, then what? Tato raga prabhavati, tato raga prabhavati, dveshas chataranantaram, dveshas chatara, tato lobha prabhavati, tato lobha, mohas chataranantaram, mohas chatarana. Tataha, thereafter, after that rush of emotional elation wears off, after the kick wears off, tataha, thereafter, then what happens? Ragaha prabhavati. You become, the technical word of raga is attachment, but I think we need to take a broader sense here. That house satisfied your emotional longings for luxury. Now the house has become your norm. The kick has worn off. It is no longer satisfying your emotional need for luxury. So then what? You need more luxury. So what do you need? Your beautiful new house has a 3-car garage. Right now you have a Toyota parked in that garage. So what do? The Toyota goes, yeah, and then what comes? Well, first of all, what will come will be, I think, one Lexus, one Audi, one Mercedes-Benz. You got a 3-car garage. Fill it up. Nice cars. More luxury. And other luxury items. I mean, you can spend an incredible amount on furniture and decorations and all of this. So that comes interesting. Even though you've got the luxury of this new house, does it end? Are your desires satisfied? Do you feel a sense of satiation? Absolutely. You feel briefly. For that first week or two after you move into that new house, you feel that sense of satiation, but within a month or two, it wears away. Then what happens? Ragaha prabhavati. Then you want more. Dveshaha chataranantaram. And after that also comes dvesha. Raga and dvesha generally come as a pair. You want more. And what is the dvesha? In this example, we can find several ways. How about, actually a good example. This house is going to be obviously not in an ordinary neighborhood, in a high-end neighborhood. And you see, remember before I said initially your garage only has one Toyota in it. Well, your neighbor's garage has a Lexus, an Audi, and a Mercedes-Benz in it. How do you feel? Dvesha. This is dvesha. We call it jealousy. So you look at what your neighbor has, you look at what you have, you judge your neighbor has more than you have less, and you feel angry, you feel agitated, you feel jealous. So this is one example of that dvesha. So for a while, that beautiful house satisfied your desire for luxury. As that sense of satiation wears away, you want more. Where does that end? Tataha lobhaha pravartate. Tataha, as a result, thereafter, lobha, greed, prabhavati, arises, sets in. This lobha is just a stronger word for kama. Lobha, greed means what? Means kama, the American expression, kama on steroids. Kama on steroids equals lobha, greed, which means what? Intense desire. And in particular, a desire that is never satiated, an insatiable desire. The metaphor that we find in the Bhagavad Gita and other scriptures is kama compared to a fire. You've heard this metaphor. If you haven't, you really must hear it. This is a brilliant metaphor. This metaphor begins with an observation that one of the many Sanskrit words for fire is analam. Agni, of course, is more common, but anala is not uncommon. Hindi mein anal, you've heard that word. Not anil, that means wind. Anal means fire. Analam. The etymology is really significant because alam is the Sanskrit adjective for enough. Enough. Like if somebody is feeding you and you say, bas, that's enough. So it's the same thing. Alam means enough. The word for fire is alam, not enough. The idea is, if you put wood into a fire, when does the fire have enough wood? When will the fire be satiated with wood? The fire will never, ever be satiated. The more wood you put in that fire, the more it consumes. So too, desire. The more desires you satisfy, the more desires that arise. Let me share with you an interesting observation about this fire. Did any of you actually make like a campfire or some kind of fire outside? There's quite a bit of skill involved in properly making a fire. Many people don't have that skill, and here's a common mistake. You start a fire, and it's really nice and bright. A small, bright fire, which is what you'd like. Suppose you add a little bit too much wood too quickly. What happens? If you add too much wood too quickly, the physical size of the fire grows, but the brightness and intensity decreases. It's getting bigger, it's getting more spread out. And you want a really bright fire, so what do? Add even more wood. But when you add too much wood too quickly, instead of getting that fire to grow more bright, what you're doing is you're just getting it to spread out bigger and bigger, and therefore the fire requires more fuel to stay as bright as it once was. Do you see what this metaphor represents? We all have desires. And we satisfy those desires. That's normal life. The problem comes when we, let's use the right word, when we overindulge, when we gratify ourselves with more than we really need and deserve. The metaphor is like putting too much wood in the fire creates a problem. Suppose we overindulge ourselves. The most obvious example of that, of course, is when you're eating food. In fact, that is a good metaphor. Look at that. Because when you overindulge in food, what happens to your appetite? If for a week in a row, if you eat, say, 20% more than you normally eat, and you do that for 1 week in a row, after 1 week, can you go back to your old diet? After 1 week of eating 20% more, you want to continue eating 20% more. That's really quite a good example. That shows the problem of overindulging. Your appetite increases, your food intake increases, and then it goes further and further. Obviously, obesity is a major, major problem in this country and in many countries today. You can see why. Well, this overindulging happens not only at dinner time. This overindulging happens throughout our lives. Do you really need that $2 million house to be comfortable? There's a real difference between what we need and what we want. You want the house. Do you need that much? If you fulfill your needs, there's no problem. If you fulfill your wants, we're in trouble. Right? I'll say that again. If you fulfill your needs, perfect. If you fulfill your wants, lobhaha, what does he say? Lobhaha, where am I? Lobhaha prabhavati. That greed for more and more and more arises. And then what? Moha cha tadanantaram. Moha means delusion, means infatuation, as a common translation. And these terms, like delusion and infatuation, are really highly suggestive that your value structure is getting corrupted. How is your value structure getting corrupted? You want more and more and more. Not only do you want more and more, but you're more prepared to make ethical compromises to get all of that. Already you made some compromises to get the house in the first place. You're working 12 hours a day. Is there any negative consequence to that, to the family? And look at the irony. You want they say this, I want that beautiful house for my family. Okay? And then for the sake of getting that beautiful house, you're working 12 hours a day. How is working 12 hours a day helping your family? It's causing a problem to your family. This is wrong thinking. We compromise our values when we are driven by want rather than need. I'll say that again. When we're driven by want rather than need. To be driven by need is good, normal. Fulfill your needs. We have needs. We should fulfill them. We must. But when we're driven not by need, but by want, our values get corrupted. And that's what this whole chapter is about, is how our values shift. Originally, your value was for the sake of the family. You wanted this beautiful new house for the sake of the family. Tell me, how much does it help your family to have that third car in the garage? How much does it help your family to have this really elegant furniture or paintings on your wall? You know, at some point, the original values got lost, and other values came to take their place. And this whole chapter talks about it. Before we continue, does this kind of teaching sound a little familiar? Well, we've just seen, just to recap this, let's just go back. He said, first of all, Purvam, first of all, manaha pravartate vijnanartam. First, the mind gets engaged in objects. Then what? Tatprapya, kamam bhajate. Then desire arises. Krodham cha, and anger arises. Then yatate karma mahat. Then you engage in great effort. This part is not quite so much like the Gita version, but look at this. Tataha, then raga arises, and dvesha arises. Tataha, then lobha arises, then moha arises. These steps that are being spelled out, Those of you who have studied the Bhagavad Gita, does it sound a little familiar to a verse or two verses that we've seen in chapter 2? Here they are. These verses are some of the most powerful. This verse on the screen is not from our Aranyaka Parva. This verse is from the Bhishma Parva. Bhishma Parva means what? Bhagavad Gita. So this verse and the following verse from the Bhagavad Gita, these verses are so powerful and so important. Let us see them briefly. Listen. Dhyayato vishayan pumsaha, dhyayato vishayan sangasteshu pajayate, sangasteshu sangat sanjayate kamaha, sangat sanjayate kamat krodho bijayate, kamat krodho bijayate. One more verse will come. This is verse 62 of chapter 2. Chapter 2, verses 62 and 63. Verse 62 says, first of all, what is step 1? Dhyayataha vishayan, dwelling on objects. Same thing as this chapter said, manaha pravartate. First the mind gets stuck on some objects. Then what happens? Sangaha teshu upajayate. Then you get attachment. And sangat, from that attachment, sanjayate, arises kamaha. Kama was the second stage here. And what? Kamat krodha abhijayate. And from kama comes krodha, exactly as our current chapter had it. The Bhagavad Gita continues. Krodhat bhavati sammohaha, krodhat bhavati sammohat smriti vibhramaha, sammohat smriti bhramshat buddhi nasho, smriti bhramshat buddhi nashat pranashyati, buddhi nashat pranashyati. Krodhat, from that krodha, bhavati, arises sammoha. How similar to this? So the prior verse ended with moha. Sammoha. Moha, same meaning. This corruption of values. Literally infatuation or delusion, but more specifically, corruption of values. So krodhat bhavati sammoha. Sammohat. And due to corruption of values, smriti vibhramaha is often mistranslated terribly as forgetfulness. What it means is you stop thinking about your values. You stop thinking about dharma. And then what? Smriti bhramshat, if you're not thinking about values, buddhi nashaha. Your mind gets corrupted, buddhi nashat. And when your mind is corrupted, pranashyati, you are finished. He makes it very plain. So these, in the entire Bhagavad Gita, these are two of the most vivid verses in describing the peril of attachment. This is we use the expression sometimes slippery slope. You've heard that expression? Slippery slope describes a situation where you get lured in a little bit, and then you go in a little further, and then more, and then more, and then more, and pretty soon you discover you're in really big trouble. And that's what's described in these verses. What's very powerful in this last verse of the Bhagavad Gita is, in the second of these two verses from the Gita, is it shows the consequence of getting drawn in, the consequence of having your values corrupted. And having seen in the Bhagavad Gita the consequence of your values being corrupted, let's return now to our Vyadha Gita. Now, this verse, I know they look the same. They're not surprising, they look the same. They're from the same scripture, right? They're just from different chapters. So now we're back to the Vyadha Gita, and we're going to see a little further the consequences of being on this slippery slope, in which in the early stages, and just to expand that term slippery slope, In the early stages, slope means you're sliding down. Early on, you don't know that you're really sliding down. It's not obvious, it's not apparent that you have slid down yet. Then you slide down a little bit more, then you slide down a little bit more. Sometimes you never realize that you're sinking down. In the script, they use this really bizarre metaphor. This bizarre metaphor of cooking a frog. Have you ever heard this? So the idea, if you have a bowl of really hot water and you throw a frog in that hot water, that frog's going to jump right out, right? So they give this metaphor. This comes someplace in some commentary, that you put this frog in cool water, and the frog is enjoying the cool water. Then you put some fire underneath it and you warm it up very slowly. And the frog doesn't recognize that the water is getting warmer and warmer and warmer. Just whatever it is, it gets used to it, and then it gets warmer and warmer. Finally, the frog is cooked. The frog didn't recognize that it was gradually getting warmer and warmer. Finally, the frog was cooked. That's what our Bhagavad Gita ends here. Buddhinashat pranashyati. You are destroyed. You are cooked. The frog is cooked. Which means the message is very powerful. And it's this. If we're not vigilant, we're going to be like that frog. We're going to get cooked. Pranashyati means your life is destroyed. What kind of vigilance is required here? The frog was not vigilant to the slight increases of temperature. We might not be vigilant to pursuing wants rather than needs. As we said before, pursuing our needs is valid and legitimate. Fulfilling every one of our wants, our desires to arise, is something very different. And we all do that a little bit, that overindulgence we talked about before. If we are not vigilant, a little overindulgence leads to more overindulgence, leads to more overindulgence. This is how obesity takes place. On the other hand, if we are vigilant, if that frog were really vigilant, as soon as it felt any increase in temperature, that frog should have jumped out of the pot. The frog was not vigilant. If we are vigilant, as soon as we find ourselves overindulging, we have to warn ourselves, hey, look, watch out. What am I doing? Why am I doing that? Why am I overindulging? Why am I fulfilling these wants? Why am I going in that direction? Why am I allowing myself to be dragged down this slippery slope? Requires vigilance. So that's what we're going to discuss now, is what are the consequences of not being vigilant. All right, let's see that. So now returning to our Aranyaka Parva, returning to the Vyadha Gita. So the further consequences are discussed here. Tasya lobha vibhutasya, tasya lobha vibhut, ragadvesha tasya cha, ragadvesha tas, nadharme jayate buddhir, nadharme jayate, vyajad dharmam karoti cha, vyajad dharmam karoti cha. Tasya, for a person who is lobha abhibhuta, for a person who is abhibhuta, overcome by what? Lobha, greed. So in our last verse, that word greed came. So for a person who has gone so far down that slippery slope that now they are dealing with lobha. Early on they dealt with kama and krodha, which led to raga and dvesha, which led to moha. Remember all of that? And now, tasya, moha and lobha. And now, tasya, for that person, lobha abhibhutasya, who is now afflicted by lobha, by greed, they've come pretty far down that slippery slope. Raga dvesha hatasya cha, they are afflicted by this raga and dvesha. To put it very simply, they are stricken with this insatiable desire. Too much wood has been put in that fire, and the wood just demands more and more and more. So too, a person who has overindulged themselves by fulfilling wants above and beyond their needs, desires become more demanding. Puja Swami Dayananda liked to make this observation. He said that a little interesting criticism of modern materialistic life. He said modern materialistic life is converting, these are his exact words, converting luxuries into necessities. What does that mean? Luxuries are converted into necessities. The first time you've owned a number of cars, your first car, if it was long ago, and if it was, anyway, I won't talk about. Let's talk about me. My first car was a piece of junk which didn't have air conditioning. My second car was also another piece of junk with no air conditioning. Finally, my third car. I had a job. I could afford a car. It had air conditioning. And that air conditioning was such a luxury. After you drive your air-conditioned car around for a month or two, is air conditioning a luxury? And just as long as I brought up Puja Swamiji, he's told a story in a very remarkable way. You know that he grew up in this little village in this Kumbakonam area of Tamil Nadu. And when I say village, especially, he was born in 1930, so 1940-ish, it was really just a nothing. There were probably 100 families lived there, and just dusty roads and all of this. And he tells the story that early on, he would go to school barefoot, no shoes. It was village life. Who gets shoes? It's a village. He goes to school barefoot. When he finally got shoes, it was a luxury. And he himself observed that luxury very quickly became a necessity. So now the shoes were a luxury, they become a necessity. Then the shoes are followed, this is not his story, I'll just extend the story now. The shoes are then followed by a bicycle. At first, a bicycle is a luxury. Very quickly, it becomes a necessity. And then, if you're growing up in India, the bicycle is followed by a scooter. Some of you, when you were young, you went on these scooters. So the scooter at first is a luxury, becomes a necessity. Then the scooter might be replaced by a motorcycle, which is a luxury, becomes a necessity. Motorcycle is replaced by this little car. What do you call it? Maruti. So at first this Maruti is a luxury. It quickly becomes a necessity. Then the Maruti gets replaced by a nicer car and a nicer car. And this is what Puja Swamiji observes. All of our luxuries are being converted into necessities. And here's his bottom line. Who is a rich person? A rich person, a wealthy person, is one who revels in luxury. Correct? A wealthy person is one who revels in luxury, but when you've converted all your luxuries into necessities, are you wealthy? This is his definition of a wealthy person. A wealthy person is anyone who feels like they are blessed with luxury. But when all of your luxuries have been converted into necessities, will you feel a sense of luxury? You won't feel a sense of luxury. You'll just feel these are ordinary necessities. You will never have a sense of luxury. You'll never have a sense of satiation, a sense of fulfillment. Why? This is the slippery slope, converting all your luxuries into necessities. So, tasya lobha abhibhutasya, as a result of being dragged down this slippery slope, you are stuck with lobha, unsatiable desire. Raga, dvesha, hatahacha, and you are stricken by this raga and dvesha. It never goes away. You're always discontent and always trying to get rid of that feeling of being discontent. And what do? You get another car, you get more furniture, you get this, you get the other thing. Whatever you get temporarily alleviates that sense of being discontent, but after a few days or weeks or months, that temporary sense of being fulfilled goes away, and you find yourself just as discontent as you were before. Then what? Na dharme jayate buddhihi. As a result of being dragged down this slippery slope, buddhihi na jayate dharme. Your mind, your intellect, buddhi, na jayate, in a sense not inclined towards dharma. Your mind will no longer be inclined towards dharma. Before you found yourself falling down this slippery slope, when you were at the top of that slippery slope, you were really committed to following dharma. But you go down and down and down, you start making small compromises, then you make bigger compromises, then you make even bigger compromises to your sense of what is right and wrong. This is one of the consequences of going down this slippery slope. Early on, there's small compromises in ethics. Later, the compromises grow bigger and bigger and bigger. And now the Vyadha has a very interesting observation. This is his cultural, social observation. He says that when your mind is no longer inclined towards dharma, the Vyadha, the butcher, observes then that what happens is vyajat dharma karoticha. That a person who has been dragged down the slippery slope is no longer inclined to follow dharma. But here's the problem. You live in a society that values dharma. You don't value dharma as much, having fallen down the slippery slope, but all of your friends and neighbors do appreciate dharma, and you want to look good in their eyes. Right? What a typical thing. What will they think? If I don't appear pious and dharmic in their eyes, what will they think? So our butcher says, then therefore, vyajat dharma karoti, you will dharma karoti, you will do dharma, you will follow dharma, vyajat. Vyaja in Sanskrit means a pretense. That which you pretend to do is vyaja. It's putting on a face. It's appearing to be something different than you truly are. We also use the word hypocrite for that kind of person, or hypocritical to describe that behavior. So he says then that this person will follow dharma vyajat, which means they will pretend to follow dharma. They will appear pious and dharmic in the eyes of others, in spite of the fact that inside their values have been corrupted. And this happens all the time. There are people who, there are quote pious Hindus who might be engaged in all kinds of illegal, this happens. It happens quite a bit in India, where someone who, in a pious Hindu family, they've gotten into some business situation and they're engaged in all kinds of corrupt practices. Unfortunately, we know it happens. And what's very interesting is this person involved in all these corrupt business practices from this pious Hindu family, guess what they do on all religious celebrations? They go to the temple. Of course they go to the temple. Absolutely they go to the temple. Not only do they go that, they give a bunch of dakshina. They give a bunch into the hundi. They put a lot of money into that hundi because they want to appear pious and ethical to everyone else. This is what it means, Vyadha dharmam karoti. They act in a pretentious way, a hypocritical way, making themselves look pious and ethical to cover up the fact that their values have been corrupted. And he continues. We're still slipping down that slippery slope. There's more to go. Vyajena charate dharmam, vyajena charate artam, vyajena rochate artam, vyajena siddhyamaneshu, vyajena siddhyamaneshu, dharmeshu dvija sattama, dharmeshu dvija sattama. There's actually a third line to this verse. Tatraiva ramate buddhis, tatraiva ramate tata papam chikirshate, tata papam chikirshati. Good. So some verses will have 3 lines rather than 2 lines. So Vyadha continues to describe the consequences of slipping down this slope. Vyajena charate dharmam. He basically reiterates what he said in a prior verse. He says, charate dharmam. The person follows dharma, vyajena, as a pretense. They pretend to follow dharma. They become hypocritical. They appear pious and ethical on the outside, whereas inside, in private, they're behaving in all kinds of unethical ways. So the person maybe at home and in public is very kind and loving and all of that, but when he's in his office, watch out, doing all these unethical things. So that's what's being described here. This person follows dharma as a pretense. Hypocritically, they pretend to follow dharma. Go to the third line. Vyajena siddhyamaneshu dharmeshu dhaneshu dvija sattama. Dvija sattama, the butcher, the Vyadha, addresses the Brahmana that he's teaching. He addresses the Brahmana very respectfully. O best of twice-borns. He says, Vyajena, through deceit, siddhyamaneshu dhaneshu, with dhana, with regard to dhana, wealth. Wealth which was siddhyamaneshu, wealth which was acquired. Acquired how? Vyajena, through deceit, through pretense. So this person whose values have been so corrupted, they don't think twice of being unethical for the sake of fulfilling this insatiable desire. This is normal human behavior. This is behavior that every single person is subject to. If a person is hungry enough, just to make the metaphor really clear, if a person is hungry enough, what will they not do for the sake of food? If you're hungry enough, would you steal for the sake of food? Yeah. Would you beg for the sake of food? Of course. Why? If you're hungry enough. Now, hunger is a kind of affliction. And definitely when we feel afflicted, we want relief from the affliction. But now the affliction we're talking about is not hunger, which is a need, but rather lobha, greed, insatiable desire. Insatiable desire is another kind of affliction. Someone who's afflicted by hunger might do anything for the sake of filling their stomach. Someone who's afflicted by insatiable desire, greed, they might do just about anything for the sake of easing that affliction. So therefore, Vyajena siddhyamaneshu dhaneshu, that money, that wealth that they have acquired through deceitful means, what do they do? Artam, that wealth acquired deceitfully. In the second line, Vyajena rochate, they enjoy. They enjoy the wealth that they have acquired through deceitful means. And this verse concludes, in fact, the Vyadha, our Vyadha here concludes, he says, Tatra ramate buddhihi, the buddhi, the mind, tatra ramate, tatra eva ramate, the mind revels in that alone. That what? That wealth, that luxury. Having fallen into this pattern of just wanting more and more and more, you want, to go back to Puja Swamiji's language, you want more kicks. You want another kick, you want another kick, and you want another kick. And therefore, tatra, in those items of luxury, ramate buddhi, the mind revels in those things alone, tataha, and as a result, as a consequence of all of that, papam chikirshati. The person, chikirshati is a desiderative verb, means he wants to do. Chikirshati means he wants to do. He wants to do what? Papam. He wants to commit sin. Before he slipped down this slippery slope, he didn't want to do sin. He wanted to follow dharma before he got dragged down this slope. Having been dragged down this slope, he is ready and even eager to commit sin for the sake of easing the affliction of this insatiable desire which arose due to this overindulgence, due to fulfilling wants rather than needs. Now some final comments. Nice observation. In modern times, especially in India, you hear people talking about how materialistic everyone has become, so materialistic. Everywhere you go, people are talking, Hindus in particular will use this kind of language. Oh, people are becoming so materialistic. Fine, I mean, it's an observation, and there's some obvious truth in that. But here's the point. Do you think that this problem of becoming overly materialistic, is this a problem that is unique to the 21st century? What is our butcher talking about? This whole thing is talking about the problem of materialism. That's what this whole section is about. Don't think that the problem of materialism is anything new. In modern times, you want a nicer house and more cars. In ancient times, you wanted more land and more cows. It's the same thing. More land, more cows, more servants, more whatever it is, more houses, more gold. They had wealth in ancient times. Do you think they didn't want more? They wanted more. Do these, first of all, distinguish need and want? In modern times, we have needs. In ancient times, they had needs. In modern times, we also have wants. In ancient times, they had wants. In modern times, we have this problem of overindulgence. Not merely satisfying our needs, but going over the top and trying to satisfy all of these many, many wants. Do you think that never occurred in ancient times? Of course it occurred. That's what the Vyadha is talking about. The same problem that we call materialism today is exactly the same problem that happened in ancient times. And when we talk about the problem of materialism, what exactly does that mean? It is a corruption of values. That's what our whole topic is. And specifically, what do we mean by a corruption of values? What is the purpose of life? We go to the absolute fundamentals of religion and life. The purpose of life to collect more stuff. Who will say yes to that question? The purpose of life cannot be to accumulate more and more. Although some people behave like that. There's an old joke. There is this huge motor home, big motor home with a satellite dish on it and a air conditioner on it. A guy had invested so much money in his mobile home. Mobile home means it's a rich person's toy, because they have that $2 million house, but then they want to go out for a trip. So what do? They get into this $100,000 mobile home. So it's a rich person's toy. This old joke goes, there's a bumper sticker on this big mobile home. The bumper sticker says, "Whoever dies with the most toys wins." How's that for a philosophy of life? Whoever dies with the most toys wins. Who will ascribe to that? We know better. We know that's what's true. We know what is truly valuable in life. No one needs to tell you that being loving and caring, being surrounded by loving and caring people is valuable in life. Being engaged in helping others and having others help you is valuable in life. Being engaged in a process of spiritual growth, this is what's truly valuable in life. No one needs to tell you. But what happens? Through this process of overindulgement, is that a word, overindulgement? It is now. Through this process of overindulgement, can't be a word. What? Indulgence? Indulgence, thank you. The word didn't come, I have no idea why. So, okay, through this process of, thank you, through this process of overindulgence, what happens to those values? Values slowly get corrupted without our even being aware of it. Like that frog? What is the message? Don't be that frog. Don't be that frog. Be alert, be vigilant, be aware of this problem of the slippery slope. And to be vigilant means to always be alert. Do I need this, or do I merely want it? If I need it, go for it. If it's a mere want, set it aside. And you say, but Swamiji, I can afford it. In fact, I can afford 2 or 3 of them. Don't go there. Seriously. Sure, you can afford so much more, but by buying all of that, you are overindulging and therefore starting to slip down this slope. If there's a genuine need, you have a moral response. Really speaking, if you have a genuine need, it's adharmic not to fulfill it. You must fulfill it if it's genuinely a need. But if it's not a need, if it's a mere luxury, let it be. And by letting it be, you avoid slipping down this slope. You prevent this process of having your values be corrupted. You live your life with these highest values. And that's the message of the Vyadha, the butcher. He has more to say. We'll see that in our next class. All right, some closing announcements. Tomorrow, Sunday, we have our satsang, question-answer session at 6:15. A week from Sunday, I mentioned before, we're starting I'll be teaching this residential camp at Arsha Vidya Gurukulam. Several people have asked about carpooling. So can I just find out, amongst you sitting here, how many of you are planning on coming to the camp? Just raise your hands. Okay, so quite a few of you. How many of you would like to carpool? Raise your hands. Since there's a couple of you who'd like to carpool, can I ask, those of you who are planning to go, could you just stand in back of the hall for just 2 minutes at the end of this class? If you're planning to go, stand at the back of the hall, and those of you who would like to carpool, or maybe those of you who'd like to carpool, raise your hands up again. Stand up, please. Who wants to carpool? So Shanta and Chanchal, Saroja and Chanchal. So maybe those of you who are going, introduce yourself to Chanchal and Saroja. Why is I don't know what's happening here. But what was that word? Indulgence. What was my version? Indulgent. Anyway, if you can help them out with a ride, that would be a very good idea. Instead of standing in the back of the hall, just seek them out and offer them a ride. If you haven't, by the way, Arsha Vidya will send you registration information. If you haven't already received registration information, call them up and they'll send it to you. Okay, library will be open after class, and we'll conclude with our prayers. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.